Shiphrah and Puah, Exodus 1:15-21. Shiphrah and Puah were Hebrew midwives confronted with Pharaoh's command to kill newborn Israelite boys. Their defiance was rooted in fear of God, a recognition of divine authority above the king. Rather than openly rebel, they used prudence, explaining that Hebrew women gave birth before a midwife could arrive. Their resistance preserved Israel's growth at a critical moment, and God rewarded them with families of their own. Historically, this episode illustrates how women on the margins of political power could shape national destiny. Theologically, their story is the earliest biblical case of civil disobedience grounded in faith. The text memorializes their names while omitting Pharaoh's, signaling God's valuation of covenant loyalty over empire. The daughters of Zelophehad, Numbers chapters 27 and 36, and Joshua 17. Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah challenged the inheritance system when their father died without sons. They asked Moses for their father's land to keep his name within the tribe. God affirmed their request, making it a binding statute. Daughters could inherit when no sons existed. Later clarifications required marrying within the tribe to protect boundaries. Their boldness not only secured their family's future, but also advanced women's legal status in Israel. Theologically, their case underscores that covenant promises are not restricted by gender and that God values justice within the household structure. Their story is one of advocacy, persistence, and divine affirmation of women's role in shaping law. Huldah the prophetess, 2 Kings 22, and 2 Chronicles 34. When a book of the law was discovered during temple repairs under King Josiah, the royal delegation sought an authoritative interpretation. They consulted Huldah, identified as a prophetess, a person recognized for speaking God's message to the community. She confirmed the scroll's authority, announced judgment, and promised mercy to Josiah for his humility. Her legal prophetic ruling triggered a national covenant renewal and sweeping reforms. Huldah functioned like a constitutional judge, interpreting God's word for the nation. Her authority shows that God entrusted women with theological and legal discernment at the highest levels. She stands as a corrective to the assumption that prophetic or teaching authority was closed to women in ancient Israel. The wise woman of Abel Beth-Maachah, 2 Samuel 20, verse 14-22. When Joab besieged Abel to capture Sheba, an unnamed wise woman initiated negotiations from the wall. She argued that Abel was historically a place of wisdom and inquiry, not rebellion. She persuaded her townspeople to execute Sheba and end the siege. Her diplomacy saved countless lives. Theologically, she embodies wisdom literature in action, resolving conflict through reason rather than violence. In civic terms, she demonstrates that grassroots leadership, even by someone unnamed, can alter the course of national conflict. Her success affirms negotiation and justice as tools of deliverance alongside military force. Rizpah, 2 Samuel 21, verses 1-14. Rizpah, a concubine of Saul, endured the execution of her sons in a blood feud. She set up a vigil beside their exposed bodies for months, protecting them from scavengers. In the ancient world, denial of burial was a profound disgrace. Her persistence pressured David to gather the bones of Saul, Jonathan, and the executed men for honorable burial. Rizpah's silent protest turned grief into prophetic witness, forcing the monarchy to confront unresolved injustice. Theologically, she embodies covenant responsibility for the dead and communal righteousness. Politically, she shows how even marginalized women could bend kings to moral accountability. Abigail, 1 Samuel 25. Abigail, wife of the surly Nabal, intervened when David prepared to slaughter her household after Nabal's insult. She approached David with provisions, humility, and carefully framed arguments. She appealed to his future kingship, urging him not to stain his reign with needless bloodshed. David relented, blessing her discernment. Her wisdom protected her household and preserved David's honor. When Nabal later died suddenly, David married her, recognizing her prudence. Abigail demonstrates how diplomacy, grounded in theological insight, can diffuse violence and redirect destiny. The widow of Zarephath, 1 Kings 17, verses 8-24. During a famine, Elijah was sent to a Gentile widow in Zarephath. She herself was preparing what she thought would be a final meal for her and her son. Elijah instructed her to bake bread for him first, promising that her flour jar and oil jug would not run out until the famine ended. Her act of trust not only sustained her household, but also provided a living demonstration of God's provision beyond Israel's borders. Later, when her son died, Elijah prayed and the boy was restored to life. She models faith expressed through radical trust and obedience. For Israel, her testimony declared that God's provision and resurrection power reached even outsiders, prefiguring New Testament themes of Gentile inclusion. Deborah, Judges chapter 4 and chapters 5. Deborah, both prophetess and judge, guided Israel in a time of oppression. She delivered legal rulings under her palm tree and summoned Barak to battle Sisera. When Barak insisted she join him, she prophesied that victory would be credited to a woman. The campaign ended with Jael killing Sisera. Deborah's song celebrated God's intervention and immortalized women's roles in salvation history. She stands as a unique model of female governance, combining judicial, prophetic, and military leadership. Her story legitimizes women's leadership in spheres often presumed to be male only. Priscilla, Acts 18, Romans 16, and 1 Corinthians 16. Priscilla, often mentioned alongside her husband Aquila, was a tent maker who partnered with Paul in ministry. What is significant is that in several passages her name is listed before her husband's, suggesting her prominence. She, with Aquila, hosted churches in her home and provided theological instruction to Apollos, an eloquent preacher who knew only John's baptism. They explained the way of God more accurately, refining his teaching. Priscilla's role illustrates how married partnerships could serve as teaching units and how women contributed to the doctrinal shaping of early Christianity. She exemplifies how knowledge, hospitality, and teaching authority worked together to sustain and expand the early church. Lydia of Philippi, Acts 16 verses 11 to 15 and verse 40. Lydia was a merchant of purple cloth, a luxury trade good, residing in Philippi. She is described as a worshiper of God, indicating she was a Gentile drawn to Jewish faith. When Paul preached by the riverside, the Lord opened her heart to respond. She and her household were baptized, and she immediately offered her home as a base for the missionary team. After Paul and Silas were released from prison, they returned to her house, which had become a gathering point for believers. Lydia thus became the first recorded convert in Europe and a patron of the Philippian church. Economically independent and socially influential, she used her resources and networks to anchor Christianity in a new region. Hannah, 1 Samuel 1-2. Hannah was one of Elkanah's two wives, but unlike her rival Peninnah, she was barren. In the ancient Near Eastern context, infertility carried social shame and vulnerability. At the tabernacle in Shiloh, Hannah prayed silently for a son, vowing to dedicate him to the Lord's service. Eli the priest initially mistook her silent prayer for drunkenness, but when she explained, he blessed her. God answered, and she bore Samuel, whom she brought to the tabernacle after weaning. Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel 2 became a prophetic hymn of reversal. The proud humbled, the hungry fed, the barren fruitful. Her story highlights persistence in prayer, personal piety that transcends cultural expectations, and the recognition that children are divine trust, not private possession. Samuel's role as prophet and judge traces back to Hannah's vow and fulfillment. Phoebe, Romans 16 verses 1-2. Phoebe is commended by Paul as a diakonos of the church in Kentre and a benefactor of many. The term can mean servant, deacon, or minister, and Paul's usage suggests recognized leadership. He also calls her a prostatis, a patron or benefactor, indicating she used resources and influence to support Christian workers. Paul entrusts her with the delivery of the letter to Rome, meaning she functioned as both courier and interpreter of the epistle. In the first century world, letter carriers often explained or clarified the author's intent, suggesting she held significant theological and practical trust. Phoebe's example combines financial support, leadership, and trusted teaching function within the early church, challenging assumptions about the limits of women's contributions in early Christianity.